Margaret Sullivan woke up to the sound of wind howling outside her small cabin. She had lived in the Colorado mountains for 12 years now, ever since her husband died. The cabin was simple but cozy, with wooden walls and a stone fireplace that kept her warm during the cold winter months. It was Christmas Eve morning, and snow had been falling all night. Margaret looked out her bedroom window and saw a white blanket covering everything. The pine trees looked like they were wearing white coats. The world was quiet and peaceful, just the way she liked it. Margaret was 58 years old and had been a teacher for 30 years before she retired. She had taught second grade and loved working with children. After her husband passed away, she decided to move to the mountains to find some peace. Her daughter Sarah lived in Denver about 3 hours away and visited when she could. The cabin sat on 5 acres of land, far from the main road. Margaret liked the quiet life. She had a small garden in the summer, read books by the fireplace in winter, and took long walks in the forest. Sometimes she felt lonely, but she had learned to enjoy her own company. This Christmas Eve felt different, though. Sarah could not visit because of a snowstorm in Denver. Margaret would spend Christmas alone for the first time since moving to the mountains. She tried not to feel sad about it. At least she had food, warmth, and a roof over her head. Many people had much less. Margaret got out of bed and put on her thick robe and slippers. The wooden floor was cold under her feet. She walked to the kitchen and started making coffee. The smell filled the small cabin and made her feel better. She always had 2 cups of coffee in the morning, a habit from when her husband was alive. While the coffee was brewing, Margaret looked out the kitchen window. The snow was still falling, but not as hard as before. She could see her bird feeders hanging from the old oak tree in her yard. A few brave birds were already eating the seeds she had put out yesterday. Margaret had always loved animals. She fed the birds every day and sometimes left food scraps for the deer and other forest animals. Her neighbors thought she was too kind to wild animals, but Margaret did not care. She believed all creatures deserved help, especially in winter. After drinking her coffee and eating a piece of toast, Margaret decided to take her coffee grounds outside. She always composted them in a pile behind her cabin. It was good for the earth, and she would use the compost in her garden next spring. Margaret put on her heavy winter coat, wool hat, and thick boots. The cold air hit her face as soon as she opened the door. Her breath made little clouds in the freezing air. She walked carefully on the icy porch steps, holding tight to the wooden railing. The coffee grounds were in a small bowl. Margaret walked around the side of her cabin toward the back. This was where she kept her trash cans and compost pile. The snow crunched under her boots with each step. Everything was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. As Margaret turned the corner of her cabin, she stopped suddenly. Her heart began to beat fast. There was someone at her trash cans. At first, she thought it might be a bear looking for food. Bears sometimes came around her property, especially when food was hard to find. But this was not a bear. It was a person. A very small person. Margaret blinked hard, thinking maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there was definitely someone there. It was a child, a little boy. He was bent over one of her trash cans, digging through the garbage with his bare hands. The boy was so small and thin. He wore a light jacket that looked too big for him. His pants were dirty and had holes in them. On his feet were old sneakers with no socks. Margaret could see his skin was red from the cold. Margaret stood very still, not wanting to scare the child. She watched as he pulled things out of the trash can. He looked at each piece of garbage carefully as if he was searching for something special. Then she saw him pick up something and smell it. It looked like old food. Her heart broke a little bit. This little boy was looking for food in her trash. On Christmas Eve. In the freezing cold, Margaret had seen hungry children before when she was teaching. Some of her students came to school without breakfast or lunch. She always kept snacks in her desk for those children, but she had never seen a child so desperate that he would dig through garbage looking for food. The boy had not seen her yet. He was too focused on searching through the trash. Margaret could see his small hands shaking from the cold. His hair was messy and looked like it had not been washed in a long time. He was so thin that his clothes hung loose on his small body. Margaret took a step closer and a stick cracked under her boot. The sound was loud in the quiet morning air. The boy's head shot up like a scared animal. His eyes went wide when he saw Margaret standing there. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The boy's eyes were big and brown, and they were full of fear. He looked ready to run away. In his small hand, he held a piece of moldy bread that he had pulled from the trash. Margaret's heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. This child was so young, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He should be at home, warm and safe, getting ready for Christmas. Instead, he was out in the freezing cold looking for food in garbage cans. Margaret knew she had to be very careful. The boy looked scared and might run away if she moved too fast. She had worked with scared children before and knew they needed gentle words and slow movements. The boy took a step back, still holding the moldy bread. His eyes never left Margaret's face. She could see he was trying to decide whether to run or stay. His whole body was tense like a rabbit ready to jump away from danger. Margaret's mind raced with questions. Where did this child come from? Where were his parents? How long had he been out in the cold? Why was he so thin and dirty? And most importantly, how could she help him? The wind blew harder and Margaret saw the boy shiver. His lips looked blue from the cold. She knew she had to do something quickly. This child needed help and he needed it right now. Margaret took a deep breath and made her voice as soft and gentle as possible. She did not want to scare the little boy who was standing in front of her trash cans, holding a piece of moldy bread. "Hello there, sweetheart," she said quietly, the same way she used to talk to frightened children in her classroom. The boy jumped like someone had shocked him with electricity. He dropped the bread and took 2 quick steps backward. His big brown eyes looked even more scared now. Margaret could see his whole body shaking, and she was not sure if it was from fear or from the cold. Margaret stayed where she was. She knew that if she moved toward him, he might run away into the forest. She had seen deer do the same thing when they were scared. They would freeze for a moment, then run as fast as they could. "It's okay," Margaret said, still using her gentle teacher voice. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Margaret. I live in this cabin." The boy did not say anything. He just stared at her with those big, frightened eyes. Margaret could see that his face was very thin. His cheeks looked hollow, like he had not eaten enough food for a long time. There were dark circles under his eyes and his skin was pale except for where the cold had made it red. Margaret looked at his clothes more carefully now. His jacket was thin and had a rip in one sleeve. It was the kind of jacket someone might wear in fall, not in the middle of winter in the mountains. His pants were too short and too big at the same time. They looked like hand-me-downs that did not fit right, but it was his shoes that made Margaret feel the saddest. They were old sneakers with holes in the sides. She could see his bare skin through the holes. No socks, in snow that was several inches deep. Margaret could not imagine how cold his feet must be. "What's your name, honey?" Margaret asked, crouching down slowly so she would not look so tall and scary. The boy looked at her for a long moment. Margaret could see him thinking, trying to decide if he should answer. Finally, in a voice so quiet she could barely hear it, he whispered, "Tommy. Tommy," Margaret repeated with a warm smile. "That's a nice name. Tommy, are you cold?" It was a silly question. Of course he was cold. Anyone could see that. But Margaret wanted to keep him talking, to make him feel safe enough to stay and not run away. Tommy nodded his head just a little bit. His teeth were chattering now, making small clicking sounds. Margaret could see his breath coming out in little white puffs in the cold air. "Tommy, when was the last time you had something to eat?" Margaret asked gently. Tommy looked down at his feet. He seemed ashamed to answer. Margaret waited patiently, giving him time to think. She had learned from teaching that children sometimes needed time to find their words, especially when they were scared or upset. "Yesterday," Tommy finally said, his voice still very quiet. "I found some crackers." Margaret's heart sank. Yesterday meant he had not eaten anything today, and crackers were not a real meal. She wondered how long this little boy had been hungry. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" Margaret asked. Tommy's face changed when she asked this question. He looked even more scared, if that was possible. He glanced around like he was looking for someone who might be hiding behind the trees. "Derek says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," Tommy said. "Derek?" Margaret asked. "Is Derek your daddy?" Tommy shook his head. "Derek is Mama's friend. Mama went away, but she's coming back. Derek takes care of me until she comes back." Margaret felt worried when she heard this. If Derek was taking care of Tommy, why was Tommy out here alone, digging through trash cans for food? Where was this Derek person? "Tommy, does Derek know where you are right now?" Margaret asked. Tommy shook his head again. "Derek is sleeping. He sleeps a lot. I got hungry, so I came to look for food." Margaret's worry grew bigger. This child had left wherever he lived and walked through the snow to look for food. He was so desperate that he was willing to eat moldy bread from a trash can. "How far did you walk to get here, Tommy?" Margaret asked. Tommy pointed down the mountain. "From down there. The trailer with the blue door." Margaret knew the trailer he was talking about. It was about 2 miles away, down a winding mountain road. That meant this little boy had walked 2 miles through the snow, wearing nothing but thin clothes and shoes with holes in them. "Tommy, you must be very cold and tired," Margaret said. "Would you like to come inside my house and get warm? I could make you some hot chocolate." Tommy's eyes got wider, but this time with interest instead of fear. Margaret could tell he wanted to say yes, but he was still scared. "I have marshmallows too," Margaret added with a smile. "And cookies." Tommy looked toward Margaret's cabin, then back at her face. He was clearly thinking hard about what to do. Margaret could see the battle going on in his mind. He was hungry and cold and wanted help, but someone had taught him not to trust strangers. "Derek says bad people try to trick kids with food and candy," Tommy said, but his voice did not sound very sure. Margaret nodded. "Derek is right about that, Tommy. There are some bad people in the world and children should be careful. But I'm not a bad person. I used to be a teacher. I taught children who were about your age." Tommy looked interested when she said this. "You were a teacher?" "Yes, for 30 years. I taught 2nd grade. How old are you, Tommy?" 8, Tommy said. "I'm in 3rd grade, but I haven't been to school for a while." Margaret wondered why Tommy had not been to school, but she did not ask. She did not want to scare him away by asking too many questions. A strong wind blew across the yard, and Tommy shivered so hard that his whole body shook. Margaret could not stand to watch this child suffer in the cold any longer. "Tommy, you're going to get sick if you stay out here much longer," Margaret said. "Please let me help you get warm. Just for a little while. If you want to leave, you can leave any time." Tommy looked at her for a long moment. Margaret could see him studying her face, trying to decide if she was telling the truth. Finally, he nodded his head just a tiny bit. "Okay," he whispered. Margaret felt relief wash over her. She stood up slowly and started walking toward her cabin. She did not look back to see if Tommy was following. She did not want him to feel pressured. She just walked slowly and left the door open behind her. After a few seconds, she heard small footsteps crunching in the snow behind her. Tommy was following her, but he was staying several feet back, ready to run if he needed to. Margaret walked up the steps to her porch and opened the front door. Warm air rushed out of the cabin. She stepped inside and left the door wide open. "Come on in, Tommy," she said gently. "It's nice and warm in here." Tommy stood at the bottom of Margaret's porch steps, looking up at the open door. Warm air was flowing out of the cabin, and he could smell something good cooking inside. His stomach made a loud growling sound that made him put his hands over his belly. Margaret stood just inside the doorway, not pushing him to come in. She knew that Tommy needed to make this choice himself. If she tried to force him, he would probably run away and she might never see him again. "The warm air feels good, doesn't it?" Margaret said softly. "I have the fireplace going and I just made fresh coffee. I could make you some hot chocolate if you'd like." Tommy took one small step up onto the first porch step. Then he stopped and looked around as if he was checking to make sure no one was watching him. Margaret could see that he was still very scared, but his need for warmth and food was stronger than his fear. "I won't lock the door," Margaret promised. "You can leave whenever you want to. I just don't want you to freeze out here." Tommy took another step up, then another. Soon he was standing on the porch, close enough that Margaret could see him better. What she saw made her heart ache even more. The little boy's face was dirty, with streaks of mud on his cheeks. His hair was tangled and looked like it had not been combed in days. But it was his eyes that worried Margaret the most. They were the eyes of a child who had seen too much sadness and fear. "Come on in, sweetheart," Margaret said, stepping back to give Tommy plenty of room. Tommy walked through the doorway very slowly, like he was walking into a place that might be dangerous. He stayed close to the door, ready to run if he needed to. His eyes moved around the room, taking in everything he saw. Margaret's cabin was small but cozy. There was a living room with a stone fireplace where orange flames danced and crackled. The fire made the whole room feel warm and safe. There were 2 comfortable chairs facing the fireplace, and a small Christmas tree in the corner with white lights that twinkled like stars. Tommy had never seen a house that felt so peaceful and warm. At the trailer where he lived with Derek, the heat did not work very well, and Derek never cleaned anything. The cabin smelled like pine trees and coffee and something baking in the oven. The trailer smelled like beer and cigarettes and old food. "Why don't you sit down by the fire?" Margaret suggested, pointing to one of the chairs. "You can warm up while I make you some hot chocolate." Tommy did not sit down right away. Instead, he walked around the room, staying close to the walls like a scared animal. Margaret pretended not to watch him while she went to the kitchen to make the hot chocolate. The kitchen was small and clean, with white cabinets and a window that looked out over the snowy forest. Margaret heated milk in a pan on the stove and added chocolate powder and sugar. She wanted to make it extra sweet for Tommy. Children who were very hungry needed sugar to help their bodies feel better. While the milk was heating, Margaret looked back at the living room. Tommy was standing in front of the Christmas tree, staring at the lights and ornaments. He reached out one small finger to touch a glass angel that hung from one of the branches. "Do you like the tree?" Margaret asked from the kitchen. Tommy jumped a little, like he had forgotten she was there. "It's pretty," he said quietly. "We don't have a tree. Would you like to sit down now?" Margaret asked. "The hot chocolate is almost ready." This time Tommy walked over to one of the chairs by the fireplace. But instead of sitting in it, he sat on the floor next to it with his back against the chair. Margaret understood. The floor was closer to the door, so Tommy could run faster if he needed to. Margaret brought the hot chocolate in a big mug with a handle. She had put extra marshmallows on top, and they were already starting to melt. She set the mug on the floor next to Tommy, not too close so he would not feel crowded. "Be careful, it's hot," Margaret warned. Tommy picked up the mug with both hands. Margaret could see that his fingers were red and swollen from the cold. When he took his first sip, his eyes closed and he made a small sound of happiness. It was probably the first warm thing he had tasted in a long time. Margaret sat in the other chair, far enough away that Tommy would not feel trapped. She watched him drink the hot chocolate and felt glad that she could help him feel better, even just a little bit. "Is it good?" Margaret asked. Tommy nodded, not taking his mouth away from the mug. He drank the hot chocolate like he was afraid someone might take it away from him. "Tommy, are you hungry? I have some eggs and bread. I could make you breakfast." Tommy stopped drinking and looked at her with surprise. "You would do that?" "Of course I would," Margaret said. "Every child should have breakfast, especially on Christmas Eve." Tommy finished the hot chocolate and set the empty mug on the floor. Some of the marshmallow was stuck to his upper lip, making him look even younger than 8 years old. Margaret went back to the kitchen and started cooking. She made scrambled eggs with butter and cheese the way children usually liked them. She toasted 2 pieces of bread and put butter and jam on them. She poured a glass of orange juice and put everything on a plate. When she brought the food back to the living room, Tommy's eyes got very wide. It was more food than he had seen in one place for a long time. "Sit at the table if you want," Margaret said, pointing to a small wooden table near the window. "Or you can stay by the fire if that's more comfortable." Tommy chose to stay by the fire. Margaret gave him the plate and watched as he started to eat. At first he ate very slowly, taking small bites like he was not sure the food was real. Then he started eating faster and faster, like he was afraid it might disappear. Margaret had to look away because watching him eat made her feel so sad. This little boy was eating like he had not had food in days, and maybe he had not. While Tommy ate, Margaret noticed other things about him that worried her. There was a small cut on his lip that looked fresh. There were marks on his arms that looked like bruises, but they were old and fading to yellow. His clothes were not just dirty, they smelled bad, like they had not been washed in a very long time. When Tommy finished eating, he set the empty plate on the floor and looked at Margaret. For the first time since she had found him, he looked a little bit relaxed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're very welcome, Tommy," Margaret said. "Do you feel warmer now?" Tommy nodded. The fire had warmed him up and the hot food had made him feel much better. His cheeks had some color in them now and he was not shivering anymore. "Tommy, can I ask you something?" Margaret said gently. Tommy looked nervous again, but he nodded. "How long has your mama been gone?" Tommy thought for a moment, counting on his fingers. 3 months, I think. Derek said she went to visit her sister, but she would come back for Christmas. That's tomorrow, so she should be home soon. Margaret felt her heart sink. 3 months was a very long time for a mother to be away from her 8-year-old child. And if Tommy had been with Derek all this time, but Derek was not taking care of him properly, then something was very wrong. "What about your daddy?" Margaret asked carefully. I don't have a daddy, Tommy said. It's just me and Mama. And Derek when Mama's home. Margaret was quiet for a moment, thinking about what Tommy had told her. A mother who had been gone for 3 months. A man named Derek who was supposed to be taking care of Tommy but was not doing a good job. A little boy who was so hungry he was digging through trash cans. Tommy, are you warm enough now? Margaret asked. Tommy nodded, but Margaret could see that he was getting sleepy. The warm room and full stomach were making him tired. His eyelids were starting to close. Would you like to rest for a little while? Margaret asked. You can sleep on the couch if you want. I'll wake you up before it gets dark so you can go home. Tommy looked at the couch, which had a soft blanket folded on one end. It looked so comfortable and warm. At the trailer, he slept on an old mattress on the floor, and Derek never let him use the heat at night. Okay, Tommy said quietly. Margaret helped him to the couch and covered him with the soft blanket. Within minutes, Tommy was fast asleep, finally safe and warm. Tommy slept for 3 hours on Margaret's couch. While he slept, Margaret sat in her chair by the fireplace and watched him. In sleep, he looked even younger and more fragile. The worry lines on his small face had relaxed and he looked like what he was, a little boy who needed to be taken care of. Margaret used the quiet time to think about what she should do. This child was clearly not being cared for properly. He was too thin, too dirty, and too hungry. The bruises on his arms worried her. Most of all, his mother had been gone for 3 months, and an 8-year-old boy should not be left alone with someone who was not feeding him or taking care of him. When Tommy woke up, the sun was starting to set. The room was getting darker, and Margaret had turned on a few lamps to make it cozy. Tommy sat up on the couch and looked around, seeming confused for a moment about where he was. Did you have a good rest? Margaret asked gently. Tommy nodded and rubbed his eyes. I had a dream about my mama, he said. She was making me pancakes for breakfast. Margaret's heart ached when she heard this. That sounds like a nice dream. Do you and your mama make pancakes together? Sometimes, Tommy said. When she's not too tired from work. Mama works at the diner in town. She has to get up really early and comes home really late. Margaret knew the diner Tommy was talking about. It was about 15 miles down the mountain, in the small town where she sometimes went to buy groceries. It was a hard job that did not pay very much money. Tommy, can you tell me more about Derek? Margaret asked carefully. She did not want to scare him, but she needed to understand what was happening at home. Tommy's face changed when she mentioned Derek's name. He looked nervous again and his hand started playing with the edge of the blanket. Derek is okay, Tommy said, but his voice did not sound sure. He lets me watch TV sometimes, and he gives me food when he remembers. When he remembers? Margaret asked. Tommy nodded. Sometimes Derek forgets to go to the store, or he spends the money on other things. Then there's no food in the house. Margaret felt angry when she heard this. A grown man should never forget to feed a child. What kind of other things does Derek spend money on? Tommy looked down at his hands. Beer. And those bottles with the brown liquid that makes him sleep a lot. And sometimes his friends come over and they play cards and Derek gives them money. Margaret understood now. Derek was drinking and gambling away money that should have been used to buy food for Tommy. This was even worse than she had thought. Tommy, what do you do when there's no food in the house? Margaret asked. I look around for things, Tommy said quietly. Sometimes there are crackers or old bread. Sometimes I can find coins on the floor and walk to the store. But it's really far and Derek gets mad if I leave without telling him. How often does this happen? How often is there no food? Tommy thought for a moment. A lot, maybe every week. Derek says Mama sends money, but I never see it. Margaret was beginning to understand the whole picture and it made her feel sick. Tommy's mother was supposed to be sending money for his care. But Derek was using that money for alcohol and gambling instead of food and other things Tommy needed. Tommy, when your mama calls, do you get to talk to her? Margaret asked. Tommy looked confused. Mama doesn't call. Derek says she's too busy visiting her sister, but she'll call on Christmas Day for sure. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather outside. A mother who loved her child would call, especially if she had been away for 3 months. Something was very wrong here. Does Derek have a job? Margaret asked. No, Tommy said. Derek says he's looking for work, but there aren't any jobs. He stays home and watches TV most of the time. Sometimes he goes out with his friends at night and doesn't come back until the next day. What do you do when Derek goes out and doesn't come back? Tommy shrugged like this was normal. I stay in the trailer. I lock the door like Derek taught me. Sometimes I get scared, but I know Derek will come back. He always comes back. Margaret could not believe what she was hearing. This man was leaving an 8-year-old child alone overnight in a trailer, with no food and no way to get help if something happened. Tommy, do you go to school? Margaret asked. Tommy shook his head. Not since Mama left. Derek says the school is too far away and he doesn't have a car to take me. He says Mama will take me back to school when she comes home. So Tommy had not been to school for 3 months either. Margaret knew that schools had rules about this. If a child stopped coming to school, someone should have checked on him. But maybe Derek had told the school that Tommy had moved away. Tommy, do you have any other family? Grandparents or aunts or uncles? I have a grandma, but she lives far away. Mama talks to her on the phone sometimes, but I haven't seen her in a long time. What about your mama's sister? The one Derek says she's visiting? Tommy looked confused again. I don't know about Mama's sister. Mama never talked about having a sister. This worried Margaret even more. If Tommy's mother did not have a sister, then where did Derek say she had gone? And why would he lie about it? Margaret decided to ask a harder question. Tommy, has Derek ever hurt you? Tommy's whole body went stiff and he pulled the blanket up to his chin. He did not answer for a long time. Sometimes Derek gets really mad, Tommy finally said in a very quiet voice. When he drinks the brown stuff, he yells a lot. Sometimes he pushes me or hits me, but not hard. He says it's my fault for making him angry. Margaret felt tears starting in her eyes, but she tried not to let Tommy see them. No child should ever be hit no matter what. And no child should think it was their fault when an adult hurt them. Tommy, listened to me very carefully, Margaret said, moving her chair closer to the couch. It is never okay for a grown-up to hit a child. Never. And it is never the child's fault when a grown-up gets angry. Do you understand? Tommy looked at her with wide eyes. But Derek says, Derek is wrong, Margaret said firmly but gently. Adults are supposed to take care of children and keep them safe. They are not supposed to hurt them. Tommy was quiet for a long time, thinking about what Margaret had said. My mama never hit me, he said finally. That's because your mama loves you and knows that hitting is wrong, Margaret said. As the evening went on, more of Tommy's story came out. Derek had been Tommy's mother's boyfriend for about a year before she left. Tommy did not like Derek very much, but his mother seemed happy. So Tommy tried to be good. When Tommy's mother left, Derek told him she would be back soon. At first, Derek tried to take care of Tommy, but he was not very good at it. He did not know how to cook anything except sandwiches and soup from cans. He did not know when Tommy was supposed to go to bed or take baths or brush his teeth. As the weeks went by, Derek started drinking more and caring less about Tommy. He would sleep until afternoon and then sit in front of the TV with a beer. He stopped buying food regularly. He stopped doing laundry. He stopped making sure Tommy was clean and safe. Tommy learned to take care of himself as much as he could. He washed his clothes in the sink when they got too dirty. He tried to keep the trailer clean. He learned to find food wherever he could, which was why he had come to Margaret's house. Derek gets money every month, Tommy said. It comes in an envelope with Mama's name on it. Derek says it's from Mama to take care of me. But Derek uses it for other things. Margaret realized that this was probably government assistance money that came in Tommy's mother's name. Derek was using it while not actually taking care of Tommy properly. The more Tommy talked, the more worried Margaret became. This was not just a case of a man who was not good at taking care of children. This was neglect and abuse. Tommy was being hurt and was not getting his basic needs met. As it got later, Tommy started to look worried. I should probably go home, he said. Derek will be mad if I'm not there when he wakes up. Margaret did not want to let Tommy go back to that trailer, but she also did not want to scare him or make him feel like he was in trouble. She needed time to think about what to do. Tommy, it's getting dark and cold outside, Margaret said, and you've had a long day. Why don't you stay here tonight? I can call Derek and tell him you're safe. Tommy shook his head quickly. Derek doesn't have a phone. And he doesn't like it when I'm not home. He says bad things can happen to kids who don't come home. Margaret realized that Derek was using fear to control Tommy. He was making the little boy afraid to ask for help or go anywhere else. What if I take you home and talk to Derek myself? Margaret suggested. Tommy looked terrified at this idea. No, Derek doesn't like strangers. He would be really mad. Please don't do that. Margaret could see that Tommy was truly afraid of Derek's reaction. She needed to find another way to help him, one that would not put him in more danger. Margaret could see that Tommy was getting more and more worried as the evening went on. He kept looking out the window at the dark sky and fidgeting with his hands. She knew he was thinking about going back to the trailer even though he was safe and warm in her cabin. "Tommy," Margaret said gently, "I can see you're worried about Derek, but I'm worried about you. You've told me that there's often no food at home, and that Derek sometimes hurts you. That's not okay." Tommy shook his head quickly. "Derek's not that bad. He's just sad because Mama's been gone so long. When Mama comes back tomorrow, everything will be better." Margaret's heart broke a little more every time Tommy talked about his mother coming back. The hope in his voice was so strong, so pure. He truly believed that his mother would walk through the door on Christmas Day and everything would be fine. "Tommy, can you tell me more about the day your mama left?" Margaret asked softly. Tommy's face lit up a little, the way children's faces do when they talk about someone they love. Mama was getting ready to go see her sister. She packed a little bag with some clothes. She told me to be good for Derek and that she would be back soon. "Did she say anything else?" Margaret asked. Tommy thought hard, trying to remember. "She hugged me really tight, tighter than usual, and she looked sad. She said she loved me and that I should remember that no matter what happens." Margaret felt a chill when she heard this. It sounded like Tommy's mother had been saying goodbye, not just see you later. "Did your mama seem worried about anything?" "She was crying a little bit," Tommy said, "but she said it was because she would miss me while she was gone. Derek said Mama was just being silly." "Tommy, did your mama take her car when she left?" Tommy shook his head. "Mama doesn't have a car. Derek was going to drive her to meet her sister, but Derek came back alone. He said Mama's sister picked her up." This worried Margaret even more. If Derek had driven Tommy's mother somewhere and came back alone, then Derek knew exactly what had happened to her. But his story about a sister did not make sense, especially since Tommy had never heard his mother talk about having a sister. Margaret decided she needed to ask some harder questions, even though she was afraid of what the answers might be. "Tommy, has Derek ever talked about your mama in a way that seemed strange? Has he ever said anything that didn't make sense?" Tommy was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then he said, "Sometimes Derek talks to himself when he's been drinking. He says things like, 'I didn't mean for it to happen,' and 'she shouldn't have threatened me.' But when I ask him what he means, he gets mad and tells me to stop listening." Margaret felt her blood turn cold. This sounded very much like Derek was feeling guilty about something that had happened to Tommy's mother. "Tommy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. The night before your mama left, did you hear Derek and your mama arguing?" Tommy nodded slowly. "They were fighting in the kitchen after I went to bed. Mama was crying and saying she was going to take me away. Derek was yelling and saying she couldn't leave him. He said he would stop her." Margaret's hands started shaking. This was sounding less and less like a woman who had gone to visit a sister, and more like something terrible had happened. "What happened the next morning?" Margaret asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Derek woke me up and said Mama had decided to leave early. He said she was already gone. I asked why she didn't say goodbye to me, and Derek said she didn't want to wake me up." Margaret knew that no loving mother would leave without saying goodbye to her child, especially if she was going to be gone for months. Something was very wrong with Derek's story. "Tommy, when Derek gets mail with your mama's name on it, does it come to your address?" "Yes, it comes to our mailbox. Do you think your mama would get mail at your house if she was staying with her sister somewhere else?" Tommy looked confused. He had never thought about this before. "I don't know. Maybe she told them to send it there." Margaret realized that the mail was probably government assistance checks or benefits that came in Tommy's mother's name. If Derek was collecting this money while Tommy's mother was supposedly away, that was very suspicious. Margaret knew she had to be very careful about what she said next. She did not want to destroy Tommy's hope about his mother coming home, but she also needed to understand what had really happened. "Tommy, I want to help you figure out how to contact your mama," Margaret said. "If she's been gone for 3 months, she must be worried about you. Do you know the name of the sister she's supposed to be visiting?" Tommy shook his head. "Derek just says her sister. I asked him once what her name was, but he said it didn't matter because Mama would be home soon." "What about your grandma? Do you know how to call her?" "I know Grandma's name is Betty, and she lives in a place called Kansas. but I don't know her phone number. Mama used to call her sometimes, but Derek doesn't have a phone. Margaret was starting to put the pieces together, and the picture they made was terrifying. Tommy's mother had been arguing with Derek about leaving and taking Tommy with her. The next morning, Derek claimed she had left early without saying goodbye. She had been gone for 3 months without calling or visiting. Derek was collecting money that came in her name but was not using it to care for Tommy properly. All of this pointed to one horrible possibility. Tommy's mother had not left voluntarily. Something had happened to her and Derek knew what it was. Margaret realized she needed to find out the truth, not just for Tommy's sake, but because if Derek had hurt Tommy's mother, then Tommy was in danger too. Tommy, I need to ask you one more important question, Margaret said, moving closer to him on the couch. The morning after your mama and Derek had their big fight, did you notice anything different about Derek? Did he seem upset or nervous? Tommy thought about this carefully. Derek was acting funny. He was cleaning everything in the trailer, which he never does, and he made me stay in my room for most of the day. He said he had important things to do. Did you see Derek cleaning anything in particular? He was scrubbing the kitchen floor really hard, and he took some clothes outside and burned them in a barrel. He said they were old clothes that nobody needed anymore. Margaret's heart started beating very fast. Derek had been cleaning up evidence and burning clothes right after Tommy's mother disappeared. This was not the behavior of someone whose girlfriend had simply gone to visit family. Tommy, did Derek seem sad that your mama was gone, or did he seem relieved? Tommy looked surprised by this question. Derek didn't seem sad at all. He seemed happier, I think. He stopped arguing with people on the phone, and he started drinking more, but he also started smiling more. Margaret now felt certain that something terrible had happened to Tommy's mother, and that Derek was responsible. This meant that Tommy was living with someone who had hurt his mother and who was neglecting and abusing him. She realized that Tommy's mother was not coming home for Christmas. She was never coming home, and somehow she was going to have to find a way to tell this little boy the truth without completely destroying him. But first, she needed to make sure Tommy was safe. If Derek had hurt Tommy's mother, then Derek was dangerous. And if Derek realized that Tommy was starting to tell people about what was happening at home, Derek might hurt Tommy too. Tommy, Margaret said, taking his small hands in hers, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I don't think your mama is visiting her sister. I think something bad happened to her and Derek knows what it was. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he shook his head hard. No, Mama is coming back tomorrow. Derek promised. I know Derek promised, sweetheart. But think about what you've told me. Your mama would never leave you for 3 months without calling. She would never miss Christmas with you, and she would never let you go hungry or get hurt. Tommy started crying harder, but Derek said, he said Mama was coming back. I think Derek lied to you, Tommy. I think Derek hurt your mama, and that's why she can't come home. Tommy pulled his hands away from Margaret and curled up into a ball on the couch. He was crying so hard that his whole body was shaking. All the hope he had been holding on to for 3 months was crashing down around him. Margaret moved closer and gently rubbed Tommy's back while he cried. Her own tears were falling now, too. She had taught children for 30 years, and this was the hardest thing she had ever had to tell a child. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, Margaret whispered. I'm so sorry. Tommy cried for a long time while Margaret held him. She let him cry, knowing that he needed to let out all the sadness and fear he had been carrying for 3 months. When his sobs finally started to quiet down, Margaret gently wiped his face with a soft tissue. Tommy, I know this is the worst news you could ever hear, Margaret said softly, but I need you to understand something important. None of this is your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Tommy looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. But what if Mama really is coming back tomorrow? What if Derek was telling the truth? Margaret's heart ached for this little boy who was still trying to hold on to hope, even after everything she had told him. Tommy, if your mama was alive and able to come home, she would have called you by now. She would have sent you letters or presents. She would never let you go hungry or let Derek hurt you. Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking about this. Deep down, he had started to worry that something was wrong. 3 months was a very long time for his mother to be away without any contact, and his mother had never mentioned having a sister before. What am I going to do? Tommy whispered. Where am I going to live? This was the question that Margaret had been thinking about all evening. She knew she could not send Tommy back to Derek, especially now that she suspected Derek had hurt Tommy's mother. But she also knew that she could not just keep Tommy without following the proper legal steps. "First, we need to make sure you're safe," Margaret said. "You cannot go back to Derek. I think Derek is dangerous." "But where will I go?" Tommy asked, his voice full of fear. Margaret had been thinking about this, and she had made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "Tommy, would you like to stay here with me? At least for now, until we can figure out what's best for you?" Tommy's eyes got wide. "You would let me stay here?" "I would love for you to stay here," Margaret said. "This house has been very quiet and lonely since my husband died. I think it would be much better with a little boy in it." Tommy looked around the warm, cozy cabin. It was so different from the cold, dirty trailer where he had been living with Derek. Here there was always food. Here Margaret was kind and gentle. Here he felt safe. But what about Derek? Tommy asked. "He'll be looking for me." "We'll deal with Derek," Margaret said. "But first I need to call some people who can help us. I need to call the police and tell them what Derek has been doing to you. And I need to call people who work with children to make sure you have somewhere safe to live." Tommy looked scared again. "Will they take me away from you?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Margaret said honestly. "There are laws about these things. Adults can't just keep children without permission, even when they're trying to help. But I promise you that I will do everything I can to make sure you stay safe and cared for." Margaret went to her phone and first called her daughter Sarah in Denver. Sarah was a social worker who helped children in bad situations, and Margaret knew she would know what to do. "Sarah, I need your help," Margaret said when her daughter answered the phone. "I found a little boy who has been abandoned and abused, and I need to know how to help him legally." Margaret explained everything that Tommy had told her about Derek and his missing mother. Sarah listened carefully and asked many questions. "Mom, this sounds very serious," Sarah said. "If this man Derek has hurt the child's mother, then the boy is in real danger. You cannot send him back there. But you also cannot just keep him without going through the proper channels. What should I do?" Margaret asked. "First, you need to call the police right away and report what the child has told you. They need to investigate what happened to his mother. Second, you need to call Child Protective Services and report the neglect and abuse. They will need to place the child somewhere safe while they investigate." "Can I ask to be his emergency foster parent?" Margaret asked. "You can ask, but it's not guaranteed. They usually prefer to place children with family members first, or with people who are already certified foster parents. But given the circumstances, they might consider it." Margaret felt worried. What if they took Tommy away and put him with strangers? What if they put him somewhere that was not much better than living with Derek? "Sarah, this little boy has been through so much. He needs stability and love. I can provide that for him." "I know you can, Mom. Let me make some calls to people I know who work in Colorado's child welfare system. Maybe I can help smooth the way for you to become his emergency foster placement." After Margaret hung up with Sarah, she sat down next to Tommy again. He had been listening to her side of the conversation, and he looked very worried. "Are they going to take me away?" Tommy asked. "I don't know what's going to happen yet," Margaret said honestly. "But I want you to know that I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you stay safe and happy." Margaret made her next phone call to the police. She told them about Tommy and about her suspicions regarding his mother's disappearance. The officer she spoke to took the information seriously and said they would send someone out to investigate Derek and search for Tommy's mother. "Ma'am, we need you to bring the child to the station so we can interview him properly," the officer said. "And we'll need to contact Child Protective Services to arrange temporary custody." Margaret's heart sank. She had hoped she could keep Tommy with her while everything got sorted out, but she understood that there were rules that had to be followed. "Can the interview wait until tomorrow?" Margaret asked. "It's Christmas Eve, and this child has been through enough trauma today." The officer agreed that the interview could wait until the day after Christmas, as long as Tommy was somewhere safe. Margaret promised that she would keep Tommy with her and bring him to the police station when they requested. Margaret's final phone call was to Child Protective Services. She reported Derek for child neglect and abuse, and she requested to be considered as Tommy's emergency foster placement. The social worker she spoke to explained that they would need to do a background check on Margaret and inspect her home before they could approve her as a foster parent. This process usually took several days or weeks. "In the meantime, we'll need to place the child in emergency care," the social worker said. "Please," Margaret said. "This little boy has been abandoned and traumatized. He needs to be somewhere stable and loving. I can provide that. I was a teacher for 30 years. I have experience with children. The social worker said she would see what she could do, but she could not make any promises. After all the phone calls were finished, Margaret sat with Tommy and explained what was going to happen. The police are going to look for your mama and investigate Derek, she said, and some people who help children are going to make sure you have a safe place to live. What if they make me live with strangers? Tommy asked. I'm going to try my best to make sure that doesn't happen, Margaret said. I've asked if you can stay here with me while everything gets sorted out. But even if they say no at first, I won't give up. I'll keep fighting for you. Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Why are you being so nice to me? You don't even know me. Margaret smiled and brushed a strand of hair out of Tommy's eyes. Because every child deserves to be loved and cared for. And because I think you and I were meant to find each other today. That night, Margaret made up the couch for Tommy to sleep on. She gave him a warm pair of her late husband's pajamas, which were much too big but clean and soft. She tucked him in with several blankets and sat with him until he fell asleep. As Margaret watched Tommy sleep peacefully for the first time in months, she made a promise to herself and to him. No matter what happened with the legal system, no matter how hard it was, she was going to make sure this little boy had a real home and a family who loved him. She had found Tommy searching through her garbage on Christmas Eve, hungry and cold and alone. But maybe, just maybe, Tommy had actually saved her too. Her life had felt empty and purposeless since her husband died. Now she had a reason to fight, a reason to hope, and a reason to believe in Christmas miracles again. Margaret woke up early on Christmas morning and looked over at the couch where Tommy was still sleeping. For a moment she wondered if the events of yesterday had been a dream. But there he was, a small boy curled up under her blankets, finally safe and warm. Margaret had not slept very well. She kept thinking about everything that needed to happen in the next few days. The police would want to interview Tommy. Child Protective Services would want to inspect her home and do background checks. And somewhere out there, Derek was probably starting to wonder where Tommy was. But today was Christmas Day, and Margaret was determined to make it special for Tommy. He had been through so much sadness and fear. He deserved to have at least one perfect day. Margaret quietly went to her bedroom closet and started looking through boxes of things she had saved from when Sarah was little. She found some children's books, a few small toys, and some clothes that might fit Tommy. They were not new presents, but they were things a child could use and enjoy. She also looked through her late husband's things and found a small wooden train that he had carved by hand many years ago. It was simple but beautiful, and Margaret thought Tommy might like it. Margaret wrapped these items in Christmas paper and put them under the tree. She wanted Tommy to wake up and see presents with his name on them. Every child should have Christmas presents, especially a child who had never really had a proper Christmas before. When Tommy woke up, he lay on the couch for a few minutes just looking around the room. The morning sun was shining through the windows, making the Christmas tree lights sparkle. The fire was crackling softly in the fireplace. Everything felt peaceful and safe. Good morning, sweetheart, Margaret said gently. How did you sleep? Really good, Tommy said, sitting up and stretching. I had a dream about my mama again. But this time she told me it was okay to be happy here with you. Margaret felt tears start in her eyes, but she smiled. That sounds like a beautiful dream. Tommy looked over at the Christmas tree and saw the wrapped presents underneath it. Are those for other people? He asked. Actually, some of them are for you, Margaret said. Tommy's eyes got very wide. For me? Really? Really? Would you like to open them? Tommy had never had presents under a Christmas tree before. At the trailer, Derek sometimes gave him a candy bar or a small toy from the dollar store, but never wrapped presents that looked special and important. Tommy got up from the couch and walked slowly over to the tree. He touched one of the packages with his name on it, as if he could not believe it was real. Go ahead, Margaret encouraged him. Open them up. Tommy carefully unwrapped the first present. It was a warm sweater that was almost the right size for him. The sweater was blue with a picture of a dog on the front. Tommy held it up and smiled. It's perfect, he said. I love dogs. The next present was a set of books about a boy and his adventures in the woods. Tommy looked through the pictures and seemed very interested. Reading had always been hard for him because he missed so much school. But he liked looking at the pictures and trying to figure out the words. The last present was the wooden train that Margaret's husband had made. When Tommy unwrapped it, he was very quiet for a long time, just holding it and running his fingers over the smooth wood. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Tommy said quietly. "Did you make it?" "My husband made it," Margaret said. "He liked to carve things out of wood. He would have wanted you to have it." Tommy looked up at Margaret with tears in his eyes. "No one has ever given me anything this nice before." Margaret sat down on the floor next to Tommy and put her arm around him. "You deserve nice things, Tommy. You deserve to be loved and cared for." Tommy leaned against Margaret and held the wooden train close to his chest. "I wish my mama could see this," he said sadly. "I think your mama can see it," Margaret said softly. "And I think she's happy that you're safe and warm and being taken care of." After Tommy opened his presents, Margaret made a special Christmas breakfast. She cooked pancakes shaped like Christmas trees and served them with syrup and butter. She made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and whipped cream. She even found some bacon in her freezer to cook alongside the pancakes. Tommy ate like he had never tasted anything so delicious in his life. "This is the best breakfast ever," he said between bites. While they were eating, Margaret's phone rang. It was her daughter Sarah calling from Denver. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Sarah said. "How are you and Tommy doing?" "We're having a wonderful Christmas morning," Margaret said. "Tommy just opened his presents." "I have some good news," Sarah said. "I talked to my contacts in the child welfare system yesterday, and they're willing to expedite your application to be Tommy's emergency foster parent. They're impressed by your background as a teacher and the fact that you've already shown such good care for Tommy." Margaret felt relief wash over her. "Really, what does that mean?" "It means that if your background check comes back clean and your home inspection goes well, they'll likely approve you to keep Tommy while they investigate his case further. It's not a permanent solution yet, but it's a good start." Margaret looked over at Tommy, who was playing with his wooden train and humming quietly to himself. "That's the best Christmas present I could have asked for." "There's more good news," Sarah continued. "The police have already started investigating Derek. They went to the trailer this morning with a search warrant. Derek was passed out drunk and didn't even know Tommy was missing until the police woke him up." "What did they find?" Margaret asked. "I don't have all the details yet, but they found evidence that supports Tommy's story about neglect. The trailer was filthy, there was no food, and Derek couldn't explain where Tommy's mother was or why he hadn't reported her missing." Margaret felt both relieved and worried. She was glad that Derek's lies were being exposed, but she was scared about what the police might discover about Tommy's mother. After Margaret finished talking to Sarah, she sat down with Tommy to explain what was happening. "The police went to talk to Derek this morning," she said gently. Tommy looked worried. "Is Derek mad that I'm here?" "Derek can't hurt you anymore," Margaret said. "The police are making sure of that. And I have good news. The people who help children think it might be okay for you to stay here with me while they figure out what's best for you." Tommy's face lit up with hope. "Really, I can stay here?" "It's not definite yet," Margaret said carefully. "There are still some things that need to happen first. But I'm hopeful." That afternoon, Margaret and Tommy spent time together doing quiet Christmas activities. They read some of the books Tommy had received as presents. They played simple games. They took a walk outside in the snow, and Tommy had his first snowball fight. Margaret had not felt this happy in a long time. Taking care of Tommy felt natural and right. She had missed having a child in her life, and Tommy clearly needed someone who would love him and make him feel safe. As evening approached, Margaret made a simple Christmas dinner. She did not have a turkey or ham, but she cooked chicken with vegetables and mashed potatoes. She lit candles on the table and played soft Christmas music. "This feels like a real family dinner," Tommy said as they ate. "It is a real family dinner," Margaret said. "We may not be related by blood, but we're taking care of each other. That makes us family." After dinner, they sat by the fireplace and Tommy played with his wooden train, while Margaret read aloud from one of his new books. The story was about a lost puppy who found a new family, and Tommy listened with complete attention. "Do you think the puppy was happy with his new family?" Tommy asked when the story was finished. "I think the puppy was very happy," Margaret said. "Sometimes the family we choose is just as good as the family we're born with." That night, as Margaret tucked Tommy into bed on the couch, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "This was the best Christmas I ever had," he said. "It was the best Christmas I've had in a long time, too," Margaret said, kissing his forehead goodnight. As Tommy drifted off to sleep, Margaret sat in her chair by the fireplace and watched the dying flames. 24 hours ago, she had been a lonely widow facing Christmas alone. Now she was responsible for a little boy who needed her and who had brought joy and purpose back into her life. She did not know what challenges lay ahead. The legal process would be complicated. There would be court hearings and social worker visits and lots of paperwork. Tommy would need time to heal from all the trauma he had experienced. And they would both have to deal with the truth about what had happened to his mother. But tonight, on Christmas night, they were together and safe and happy. Tommy had presents to play with and a full belly and a warm place to sleep. Margaret had someone to care for and protect and love. It was, Margaret thought, exactly the kind of miracle that Christmas was supposed to bring. The week between Christmas and New Year's Day passed quickly, filled with phone calls, meetings, and visits from various officials. Margaret's home was inspected by a social worker who was impressed by how clean and safe it was, and how well Tommy seemed to be adjusting. Tommy had to give several interviews to police officers and social workers about his life with Derek and what he remembered about his mother's disappearance. These interviews were hard for him, but Margaret was allowed to stay with him during most of them, which helped him feel brave enough to tell the truth. On New Year's Eve, Margaret received a phone call that changed everything. It was from Detective Morrison, the police officer who had been investigating Tommy's case. "Mrs. Sullivan, I wanted to update you on our investigation," the detective said. "We've made some significant discoveries." Margaret felt her heart start beating faster. "What kind of discoveries?" "We found remains on Derek's property that we believe belonged to Tommy's mother. Derek has confessed to killing her during an argument 3 months ago." Margaret sat down heavily in her chair, even though she had suspected this might be the truth. Hearing it confirmed made her feel sick and sad. "What will happen to Derek?" she asked. "He's been arrested and charged with murder. He'll be going to prison for a very long time." Margaret knew she would have to tell Tommy the truth about his mother's death, but she wanted to wait for the right moment and make sure she had support to help him through it. A few days later, a kind counselor came to Margaret's house to help tell Tommy what had happened to his mother. Tommy cried for a long time when he learned that his mother was really gone forever, but he was not as surprised as Margaret had expected him to be. "I kind of knew Mama wasn't coming back," Tommy said through his tears. "I just didn't want to believe it." The counselor explained to Tommy that none of what happened was his fault, and that his mother had loved him very much. She helped Tommy understand that it was okay to feel sad and angry and confused, and that these feelings would get easier to handle over time. During this same week, Margaret received wonderful news from Child Protective Services. Her application to become Tommy's emergency foster parent had been approved. This meant that Tommy could stay with her officially while they worked on finding a more permanent solution. "What happens next?" Margaret asked the social worker. "Well, we'll need to see if Tommy has any living relatives who might want to take care of him," the social worker explained. "We always try to place children with family members first." Margaret felt worried about this. What if Tommy had relatives who wanted him but could not take care of him as well as she could? What if they lived far away, and Tommy would have to leave the mountain cabin where he was finally feeling safe? The search for Tommy's relatives led to some wonderful discoveries. The social workers were able to find Tommy's grandmother Betty in Kansas. When they called her and explained what had happened, she was shocked and heartbroken. "I haven't heard from my daughter in months," Betty told them over the phone. "I thought she was just busy with her new life. I had no idea something terrible had happened to her." Betty was 75 years old and not in good health. She loved Tommy very much and wanted to see him, but she knew she could not take care of an 8-year-old boy full-time. "I think Tommy should stay with Margaret," Betty said. "From what you've told me, she's given him more love and care in the past week than he's had in months. I just want to visit him and make sure he knows he has family who loves him." The social workers arranged for Betty to fly to Colorado to meet Margaret and spend time with Tommy. When she arrived, Tommy was shy at first, but Betty was so kind and loving that he warmed up to her quickly. "You look just like your mama when she was little," Betty told Tommy, which made him smile and cry at the same time. Betty stayed for a week, and during that time she and Margaret became good friends. Betty could see how much Margaret loved Tommy and how well she was taking care of him. "I want to ask you something," Betty said to Margaret on her last day. "Would you consider adopting Tommy? I think you would be a wonderful mother to him." Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would love nothing more than to adopt Tommy," she said. "But I wasn't sure if that would be possible. I'll talk to the social workers and tell them that this is what I want for Tommy too," Betty said. "Between the two of us, maybe we can convince them that this is the best place for him." The adoption process took several months and involved lots of paperwork, court hearings, and home visits. But throughout it all, Tommy stayed with Margaret in the mountain cabin, slowly healing from his traumatic experiences and learning what it felt like to be truly loved and cared for. Tommy started attending the local elementary school, where he was placed in a special program to help him catch up on everything he had missed. He was behind in reading and math, but he was eager to learn and worked very hard with his teachers. Margaret drove Tommy to school every day and picked him up every afternoon. She helped him with his homework and read to him every night before bed. She took him to the doctor and the dentist to make sure he was healthy. She bought him new clothes that fit properly and toys that sparked his imagination. Most importantly, Margaret gave Tommy something he had never really had before: the feeling of being completely safe and loved. He knew that Margaret would always make sure he had food to eat and a warm place to sleep. He knew that she would never hurt him or leave him alone. He knew that she loved him just for being himself. Tommy made friends at school and started playing soccer, which he discovered he was quite good at. He learned to ride a bike on the mountain trails around Margaret's property. He helped Margaret plant a garden in the spring and was amazed when the seeds they planted together grew into vegetables they could eat. On the first anniversary of the day, Margaret found Tommy searching through her garbage cans. The adoption was finally finalized. Tommy was now officially Tommy Sullivan, Margaret's son in the eyes of the law and in their hearts. They celebrated with a small party that included Sarah and her family, who had driven up from Denver. Grandma Betty flew in from Kansas for the occasion. Even some of Tommy's teachers and friends from school came to congratulate them. "I can't believe it's been a whole year," Tommy said as they looked at photos from that first Christmas they had spent together. "It's been the best year of my life," Margaret said, hugging him close. Tommy had grown several inches and gained weight until he looked like a healthy, happy child. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. His hair was clean and neatly cut. Most importantly, his eyes no longer held the fear and sadness that had broken Margaret's heart when she first found him. "Do you ever miss living in the trailer?" Margaret asked, though she was pretty sure she knew the answer. Tommy made a face. "Are you kidding? I love living here with you. This is my real home." Margaret had changed too over the past year. Taking care of Tommy had given her life new meaning and purpose. She no longer felt lonely or useless. Instead of spending her days reading alone by the fireplace, she spent them helping Tommy with his homework, playing games with him, and watching him discover the joy of being a kid. "You know what the best part is?" Tommy said as they sat together on the couch where he had slept that first night. "What's that?" "I never have to worry about being hungry again. And I never have to worry about you leaving me, because you're my real mom now." Margaret kissed the top of Tommy's head. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm your mom forever and you're my son forever. Nothing will ever change that." As they sat together watching the fire crackle in the fireplace, Margaret thought about how much their lives had changed since that snowy Christmas Eve, when she had found a little boy digging through her garbage cans. She had thought she was rescuing him, but in many ways, he had rescued her too. Tommy had given Margaret a reason to hope again, a reason to plan for the future, and a reason to believe in love and family and second chances. He had filled her quiet mountain cabin with laughter and energy, and the beautiful chaos that comes with raising a child. And Tommy had found something he had never really had before: a mother who would love him unconditionally, protect him from harm, and make sure he always knew he was wanted and valued and cherished. Neither of them would ever forget the sadness of how they came together. Tommy still missed his birth mother and probably always would. But they had built something beautiful together, a real family based on love, trust, and commitment to each other. On that first Christmas Eve, Margaret had found a hungry, scared little boy who needed help. Now 1 year later, that same boy was her son, safe and loved and thriving. He went to bed every night knowing he would wake up in a warm house with someone who cared about him. He went to school every day with a full stomach and clean clothes and the confidence that comes from being truly loved. The mountain cabin that had Once echoed with loneliness, now rang with the sounds of a happy childhood. Tommy's laughter filled the rooms. His artwork covered the refrigerator. His books and toys were scattered throughout the house in the wonderful mess that comes with having a child. Margaret kept a photo on her mantelpiece from that first Christmas morning, showing Tommy opening his presents with such wonder and joy. Next to it was a more recent photo of Tommy at his school's soccer championship, grinning